Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. This is Sean Martin, your host, and you're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on ITSPmagazine, where I have the pleasure of talking to super smart people, much smarter than myself, looking at all different types of topics for how we can better support the business to deliver their services and products in a more secure fashion and protect the revenue that they generate when they do that. And one of the areas that I've seen over the decades that I've been involved in this space kind of come and go in importance and in scope and awareness and attention is identities and identity management more specifically. And of course, when you start talking identities, you have to look at the access and authentication part of it too. So clearly there's a need to control access and manage identities properly. And who knows if what I'm saying identity is what identity was 30 years ago. It's probably very different now. I can immediately think of things like a machine as an identity or an API as an identity, perhaps. So I think we're going to get into all of that. And because I don't know all the answers, I do have a lot of questions. I have Jeff Rich on from IDSA. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Sean. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. I feel like myself today.
Well, good. So you have control of your identity.
I know my identity and I have control over it. Yes.
Okay, I'll ask you that question at the end as well. Let's see how we feel.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. And speaking of identities, hopefully folks have a view of what I stand for, what I try to accomplish here on the show. But I'd like folks to learn a little more about you, Rich, Jeff Rich, to kind of set the stage for how you got involved with IDSA and this research that we're going to talk about, and maybe even some of your journey leading up to this point in time.
I'm happy to. Thanks. I'm going to start with the journey real quickly. Now, I've been doing this almost 50 years, so I'm not going to go through all the details because you're going to run out of bandwidth.
The tape reel will expire.
Exactly. But I'll briefly say, my background's in physics. I taught for astronomy and physics for a bit, did work in law enforcement, and then a little over 45 years ago, I got involved in information security, computer security, data security. It's gone through cyber. It's gone through a number of names. Much of it still, the core is the same. I started security programs at Arco Oil's company. I started a security program at Dell, at Rackspace, and a few other financial services firms as well. So this is what I do. I spent about 10 years working in some startups, and had the opportunity earlier this year, in February, actually January, to take a look at IDSA because the founding executive director was retiring, was looking for someone else with maybe a little more expertise on what's going on. So it's we thought a good fit. Been enjoying it since then. It's still a journey. It's an exploration. Identity itself is not new. As you said, identity hasn't changed. Yeah, your personal identity, and that's one of the types I want to talk about, really hasn't changed over the years. Everything else has. All the other rules are off. So I think we could spend time talking about this. IDSA every year conducts a research survey, a cohort of organizations with 1,000 or more employees, not restricted to technology, but that ends up where the center of gravity is. And we ask a series of questions, many of which are repeated year to year, to say what sort of trends are we seeing. And for those at home playing buzzword bingo, we do end up talking about AI and zero trust. So there's two of them out of the way, right away.
Ding, ding.
Yes. But I'm not here really to talk about that. Although at some point we're going to say how identity really drives those. And without managing identity correctly, you'll have neither effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, so many questions. We can get technical, philosophical, operational, all the above. We'll see where things go here. I want to ask quickly, how important is it to, because you said the only constant is our identity,
Mhm.
and as I say that, I might question, well, has our identity changed? I'm thinking in terms of behavior. Because what I was leading up to is the question is, how important is it to look back at history and how things have changed to better prepare ourselves for where we are and what's coming?
So
'Cause you
it's
have
vitally
good
important.
breadth, yeah, of
Yeah.
knowledge.
It's vitally important to look at history because without it, we will repeat every single mistake that was made because they're out there. It's human nature to go through either the easy answer, the quickest route, or whatever else may seem appropriate at the time. So if you look back at history, um, let's not maybe go back to Roman times. Let's go back to World War II. All right, World War I even. You're at a military base or you're approaching a military base. And as you approach the gate, what three words do you think you're going to hear?
Open sesame.
No, that's what you're going to try to say. But there's three words that you're going to hear.
You tell me, Jeff.
Who goes there?
Who goes there? All right.
Yeah, you go to any old war movie and you'll find who goes there the sentry says that on guard. And so that's an identity challenge right there. And even if you say, I'm Sean Martin, are you?
Yep.
So we have identity, and then we need a way, maybe with an ID badge, as time has come along, we have better ways of authenticating, because in the past it was, I'm Sean Martin, and you know my friend, Jeff, and Jeff can vouch for me, and someone can come to Jeff and say, is this Sean Martin? I'd say yes, and then they'd say, yeah, I accept this, you are Sean Martin. It was difficult without something like that, though. Now, with the issue of picture ID cards and unique devices that are issued to an individual, it's easier to say, are you really who you say you are? So looking back in the past, though, we could never forget who goes there, because simply putting up an ID badge to open a door doesn't mean that you're properly identified. It simply means you have a card that's going to open the door.
Yep.
So always go back.
Yep. I love it. And so are we learning from history? or have we continued to make some of the same mistakes, do you think?
You know, humans will always try to find a way, how can I make something easier? And actually, I'm in favor of that. Let's remove as much friction as possible. You mentioned behavior earlier. I don't think your behavior, and we could have a philosophical discussion about this. Does your behavior truly affect your identity? Depending on how you behave, I'd like to believe you're still Sean Martin. Whether you're on a podcast or robbing a bank or flying an airplane, you're still Sean Martin. So from that perspective, I think your identity really doesn't change. It's what I call your carbon-based identity. All right, because it's you. It should last your lifetime. Now, behavior definitely changes. As an example, if you go back to the 1950s, and if you were to ask someone, what's your social security number, they would probably not think twice and give it to you. Because they say, yeah, that's kind of how I that's who I am. And social security was new. It was 10 years old by the mid-50s. So, or maybe 15 or 20 years old, but still, it was relatively new. And then we reached a point where social security number was used to determine, can you get into your bank account? Can you do other things? And people started saying, no, I'm not going to share my social security number with you because that may give you access to something I don't want you to get to. So there's a behavior change. It's an artificial identity. The social security number is. That's the second type of identity. I talked about carbon-based, now artificial. That's one type of artificial identity. And the reason it's an artificial identity is if it breaks for whatever reason or it's truly compromised, you can get a new one. It may not be fun or easy, but you can get a new one. You can't get a new carbon-based identity. So there's that artificial identity, which many people started to believe, I need to put a little more protection around this. And even then, you go into a doctor's office, and I still get it today, where they say, can we have your social security number? And my answer is always no, or sometimes if I'm nice, I'll say why. But still, no, there's no need to have that. So there's an example of an artificial identity that's been created that originally people just thought of as a number, and now people recognize is a form of identity, artificial identity, that they have to have some level of protection around. So there's a behavior change. I think a more significant behavior change is if you go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, because you talked about going back in history, so I'm staying with that theme. So if you don't like it, it's your fault. You took me here.
It took us here. We're back in time. Go for it.
Yeah. If you go back then, people would love to say, hey, I'm taking a trip and I'm going to Europe and I'm leaving in a month. Even then, the only people that really knew were your immediate friends, because you didn't necessarily rent a billboard and say, I'm taking a trip to Europe, right? A vacation to Europe. Your immediate friends knew it. And then along came social media, which more and more says, if you want to use a lot of these functions, you need to give me more and more information about who you are, what you do, and where you're going to be. So now it turned into, say, Facebook saying, I'm looking forward to my vacation in Europe next year. And all of a sudden, thousands of people could see it immediately instead of your 3 or 5 closest friends that you know weren't necessarily going to disclose it. You've now given information about yourself, not necessarily identity-based, but now you've put yourself at a higher risk, because if they know your whole family's going, there's a good chance that someone wants to do something. Your house is probably going to be empty, just as an example. So being comfortable giving up more and more personal information, entering your birth date into social media platforms, which, by the way, isn't there simply for verification. It's also shared with the people that sponsor social media apps and advertisements within it, so that you can have more targeted marketing towards you. So it's specialized towards you. Do you always want to give away your birth date? I don't know. It's often used as a form of authentication. Now, if you call the doctor's office, that's actually the first question they ask you is, what's your date of birth? That's how they index your records. So an associated artificial identity, although you really can't change the date, I get that we're willing to compromise for the sake of, I want social media, I want access to this, and then at other times feel, no, I don't necessarily want to share that. So we haven't learned a lesson about what that really means. Can we be consistent? We're not there yet from a personal perspective. Now, from an enterprise perspective, things become much more complex.
Oh boy, I always think the consumer world and general societal aspects are more complex, but maybe business, because we want more control and there's more risk for a business, it becomes more complex. I'm gonna dig into that in a minute. I think there's another identity type though we haven't touched on yet. Is that correct?
There's a third. There's the carbon-based, there's the artificial-based, and there's a silicon-based identity. And that's going to be associated with either embedded on a chip or a number of chips that are associated in a device. If you see when I do it, this is my phone. This has a silicon-based identity in it, or actually more than one. And I use an artificial identity to associate my carbon-based identity with the silicon-based identity. Now, that affects
that's either what's that connection? I can presume it's a password or a fingerprint if it's a bio.
It may be a facial image. It could be any biometric. Yeah, it could be a password. It could be one of these USB devices that's used to say, if I have this, I can identify myself. There's a number of ways that you can validate that the artificial identity is the correct one to use to link both the carbon-based to the silicon-based. Now, consumers are certainly involved in that. I'm an identity geek now, right? I'm not yet recovering, but I'll have to be before long. And I've trimmed the number of identities and accounts that I have, and I call them personas that I have. Either whether it's doing something on the dark web, which I'm not endorsing anyone does, unless you're really, really dumb or a high risk taker, or you plan it out and do these that I have an email address associated with IDSA. I have a personal email address. I have an email address I use for banking. I have an email address I use for non-IDSA professional work. As I said, I'm an IDSA, an identity geek. I'm down to 12 email addresses right now, but the number of identities and personas I have in a credential management tool I have is 896. I actually removed one this morning. So that's higher than most, but anyone that says, oh, I don't have more than 3 or 5 hasn't looked, because you have a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah. And the personas thing I want to touch on quickly, because I remember years ago, even for a single app, a buddy of mine mentioned that his daughter had multiple logins, aka multiple personas, to act and be part of that environment as different people. So I don't know if that plays into what we're talking about here today. I think certainly from a consumer working with a brand, businesses recognizing that happens, I would imagine. I don't know. Do we see that in employees and partners logging into businesses as well? That might scare me a little more.
Well, I think I do see some of it. It's not as prevalent, because with it, and more, it's actually more and more apps are beginning to take steps to limit that with consumers, because they know of the risk involved. Plus, is it cost effective for them? Are they just churning more cost and not enough revenue? But yeah, that does happen, to either take advantage of different free trials or 2 different competing players in a game. Each one of those is an artificial identity. In the enterprise, in the commercial environment, you're seeing less of it, but you still see some, especially with partners. As an example, if I were to say to you, we're partners now. We have a partnership with ITSPmagazine and IDSA. We're going to give you an account to use to log in. And if there's 3 of you that do work and you don't say anything, chances are the 3 of you are going to share that account, right? However, so when I see something happen from that account that I may have even called Sean, I don't really know it's you. So some things that companies are doing more so to limit that is say, I'm going to implement a form of 2-factor authentication. Now, I believe you have your CISSP. And I have, and
I do.
I am, next year's 30 years for me, with mine. So yeah,
Nice.
I'm old.
You have a much lower number than me.
Yeah, I'm at 4-digit. So, but one of the principles you learn in that, and I heard you talk about identification, authentication, and authorization. That's clearly one of the principles. That's beyond CISSP. That's security in general. And going back to how do you confirm that Sean is Sean, there are 3, and now many consider 4 ways of having authentication. There's something that's a password, something you have, which could be this token or could be a card key or something else, something you are, which is a thumbprint, fingerprint, facial scan, and now a lot of people consider the 4th to be where you are, and where you are has to work in conjunction with at least one of the other 3. You get any 2 or more of those, you have multi-factor authentication, and that's a way that more and more organizations are saying, I'm issuing an account to Sean, and you have to register another device with me, and every time you log in, I'm going to put a challenge to that device to ensure it's you. I've just found a way to say the artificial identity I assign to you is now staying with Sean as opposed to being shared, or at least I'm reducing the chances. You could also share the device, but you could take this to the extreme at some point.
Yeah.
So I just talked about multi-factor authentication. There's another buzzword, bingo, MFA.
Look at that.
I may feel the card.
Yeah, you got it. You got it right in front of you. No, but I want to I want to get your thoughts on this, because I touched on it at the beginning. Is it possible to have a digital identity without a carbon identity? I'm thinking things that act on our behalf without us actually being present. So systems and IoT devices and and automation driven by AI or whatever it is that's doing something for us, even if we're not there as humans.
Absolutely. If you have a smart home device, a smart speaker, and you use IFTT, which is an easy, I wouldn't even call it a program, that you can just say when this occurs every day at sunset, turn on this light. You could program it to do that. That's happening without you there, without any other intervention on your part. However, for you to program that, for you to set it up, for you to say, hey, when it's sunset, turn on this light, at some point, you had to do some form of identification authentication. Otherwise, anyone could just say, hey, go turn on Sean's light every 15 minutes, and you wouldn't be able to control that. So there's a digital identity or artificial identity associated with that, but there's still a form of control in that case, going back to carbon-based. Now, let's take that on the other side and say that your car, for instance, and if your car is less than 10 years old, chances are you have an artificial identity with your car as well. And if you don't believe me, just see if your insurance company has said you can get a reduced rate if you just take this device and plug it into the slot underneath your dashboard. Those are silicon chips with identities on them. That's a silicon-based identity that creates an artificial identity for you. So they can uniquely say, how good or bad a driver are you? I told you at the end I was going to ask you how many do you have and how do you feel about it. So we're kind of getting there. We're chipping away at that one.
We are. We're working our way down. I want to bring it inside the business now. I think we've got a pretty good wrap session on kind of what it is and how it looks from the individual's perspective. And I think some of the use cases we talked about were societal or commercially driven B2C type stuff. We can talk about government interactions as well. But let's look at kind of the employee and the partner and from inside the B2C experience with identities. Because I know, and this might be a good time to start to dig into some of the research as well. Because I want to understand what organizations may or may not think about with respect to identity. What assumptions are they making? What gaps are they leaving? Where are they overdoing things perhaps? So I'm assuming some of that's in this research. Maybe you can kind of set the stage for us with what the research is, the scope of the survey, and then maybe also maybe the top finding that you think folks would really care about.
Happy to do so. And just, I'm going to put in a plug. It's free, so I'm not trying to sell anything, but anyone can download the report from this research survey, any of the past 4 years, actually, at idsalliance.org. All you have to do is put in your name and email address. We do capture that, so we capture some of your artificial identity. Yeah. But and then you could say, I don't want you to get anything else. I just want this report, and it's fine. That's all you get. But, I encourage people to take a look, especially if you're associated in any way with application development, identity administration, IAM, or security, because all three are affected by this. And to answer your first question, what's the top thing that if I had to go away with one takeaway, and it's good to see, and we ask this every year, and it's improved a lot, really, in the past 2 years. But I'm looking at the percentages. We interviewed, as I said, organizations of 1,000 or more, a little over 500 respondents on this. More than 2/5 of them, if you would, or 44%, say it's in their top 3 priority, dealing with securing digital identity. It's in the top 3 of things they're doing, regardless of their vertical space, whatever business they're in. Another 25% say it's in the top 5. Now, 17% say it's their number 1 priority. So I didn't expect that to be much higher. But if you add just those up, well over half of the organizations we surveyed have said, top 5, we know we have to address digital identity security. So that's good news. And I'll take that as a really good takeaway. Another question we asked is, what factors are driving an increase if you're having an increase? And almost everyone said they are. The 2% said they don't, are driving that increase. far and away right now, it's the adoption of more cloud applications. Many people may think that we're completely in cloud and everything's working that way. This will be available in the cloud. This podcast will be, but not everyone's there yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. But every day, more and more organizations are migrating either partially or fully to the cloud. That increases the number of identities people have to have. And organizations feel that they're losing some semblance of control over it. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but they feel that way. So 52% say, yeah, getting more cloud stuff is top. And what didn't exist 2 years ago wasn't even on the radar. Last year, 50% of the people said, we have to focus on this because of remote work. So that's brand new. And I can get into what some of the issues are and some, what I believe are some conflicting answers I see later on as well. But I see you have a question.
Yeah, so it's that third pie chart there, and I know we weren't going to talk too much about AI, but I want to talk about. I'll just state it: 63% believe they could benefit from AI or ML for identity use cases, and to me, just forget how you arrive there.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you have use cases that then presumably define policy that then hopefully define controls or the actual rules that ensure you abide by the policy. And then of course we can always talk about we're monitoring to see, are we following it? And if not, who, when, how, why are we not following it? So that's a mouthful there. Feel free to comment on it specifically around AI and ML if you have some specific points there. But to me, it's a sign that at least people are thinking about the policies. If they're looking to, maybe it's something they didn't get to before because it's so hard. Now maybe AI and ML helps. Give them.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No, I think there is some of that. This is identity and identity management is not a technology issue. There's nothing technology can fix. You have to figure out what you intend to do, what you need to do, come up with a plan, and then do that. And then go find the right tools, whether it's AI-based or not, to get that done effectively. So we need to keep that in mind. It goes back to what you said. It's a policy issue. It's not a technology issue. So anytime someone says, I'm going to go buy this tool and this will make identity management better for me, maybe, would you go buy an 18-wheeler if you need to bring groceries home? No, even if it was a nice, shiny 18-wheeler, it doesn't make sense. So figure out what you, maybe an EV, yeah, there you go. But boy, plugging that in, that's the whole neighborhood's going to brown out when you do that.
Plug into the neighbor's house on that one, I think.
Yeah. So you still have to figure out what you're going to do. But one thing that has been found, and it was the number one response, the 63% you talked about, is organizations want to use AI to find all of their outlier behavior, as in who is constantly failing passwords, who is always trying to get to something they shouldn't be getting to. Here's a real big one, and we ended up having a number that we won't dive real deep into this from the report. That how long do accounts go when someone leaves your organization before you do something to turn them off or delete them? Almost half say immediately. That's great. Yeah, and that's exactly what should happen. And going back to CISSP, ISC2 says you should delete it immediately. That never happens. But you should be able to disable it immediately and then find time to delete it after you make sure you don't have any loose ends. But we work our way down, and there's more than 5% that say we don't really know if we ever take care of it. So now you have, and there's some that say, 3 months, 6 months, once or twice a year, we go through inventory and clean things out. So you have a large number of accounts now, artificial identities, that no longer are linked to a carbon-based identity. They're left hanging and they're ignored. And anytime you have an abandoned, ignored account, it's going to be compromised. I promise. It's simply a matter of time. It's not if. So
Potentially
There's a
even
big,
inside.
so a lot of organizations want to use AI to start finding all that, because to tell someone, go find this, you need a combination of two things: a willingness to say, okay, maybe I'm new to the industry, I have to pay my dues, I'm willing to do this sort of looking line by line work, and knowing what the ramifications are. And that mix doesn't exist. If you really know what the ramifications are, you no longer want to do that work. So it is difficult to get that done. That's an excellent task for AI and machine learning, to start not only finding what's there, but start predicting when it's going to happen. And that's the number one, that 63%, that outlier. The second one, this is the only other one I'll talk about, is evaluating alert severity in the SOC, or the Security Operations Center. This is another job that is often considered, if you're a level 1 SOC analyst, you're probably new to the industry. You may or may not have just gotten out of school, and it's essentially kind of paying your dues and learning a bit, and you see what happens when you have a problem that you have to escalate. I haven't met anyone that really likes that job, really. So I personally believe that job should be eliminated, and the AI should be able to do that. I think we can do a better job of bringing people into the industry and doing something they feel has more purpose. And the reason I think it can be eliminated is 80 to 85% of every alert that comes into a SOC is going to have a routine response. It's expected and should just be handled that way. Another 5 to 7% are going to be something that requires a bit of thought, but may still apply to a given script or response. And then you're going to have 5 to 10% that need to be escalated to a higher level of expertise and experience. AI can do that, not the escalation, but the sorting out and dealing with, this is a rote response, we know how to deal with it, I can even report on it. AI should be able to do that and really make the SOC a fun place to work that is engaging and where people learn, as opposed to, I have my torture of paying my dues before I can get the job I want.
Yep. And yeah, we love the SOC analysts, and we want them to be happy and healthy. And perhaps it's a redefining level 1 to up level them and to do more important things. Absolutely.
Exactly. I'm not trying to eliminate jobs.
Exactly.
I don't want to have people laid off. I think there's a better job for them, though.
Exactly. So I want to maybe talk a bit about what identity is used for. I mean, there's the authentication and granting access to stuff, and I don't know if it's changed, but it used to be, we let you in, and whatever GPO you had full reign, and you could do whatever. And if you, I think one of the points we want to talk about is identity sprawl, but access sprawl as well, right? If you switched roles, you switch partner. I don't know what the point is. You move around, things change, roles and responsibilities shrink and grow. Identities don't always follow that. So that's one point. And then the other is, even if things were static, using the identity and the activities to better manage access and control and what you can do. I think is all different. So let's go with the first one, or whatever you want, I guess.
Yeah, one's going to lead to the next, because if you talk about identity sprawl or access sprawl, I'll give a real quick story, and you got to caution me. I do stories about everything.
All right.
But I've been doing it long enough. But I did consulting for a while, and whenever I was brought in for a consulting gig, there were 3 questions I always asked, and the first one was always, when did it happen? And often I'll get a blank stare, like, if it didn't happen, you wouldn't have hired me. So let's talk about what it was. Let's get out of the way. So that's one. The next question is, and I know the answer, but can you identify all of your assets, what their value is, and how you're protecting them? Once again, if they could do that, they wouldn't have called me. They would have it under control. So the answer to that is no. And I'm not trying to beat them up, just saying, I'm letting you know what the risk profile here looks like. The third question I ask is, would you please introduce me to the person that's worked here the longest? And people never know why I ask that. And it's because of identity sprawl and access sprawl. Because chances are, not every time, but chances are that individual, if they've been there 18 years, they have access to everything because they've done 5 different jobs. And every time they got the access for that new job, then they went to the next job and got the access for that job, and then went to the third and got all the access. And often the prior access was never taken away. Well, they've been here 15 years. Of course, we trust them. What's the big deal? It's really pretty much a spaghetti mess, so I don't want to have to go untangle it. So there's identity sprawl where they may have multiple accounts, and access sprawl where they have access to everything. The reason I want to talk to them is not just for that reason. It's that you are target one. If someone wants to break in, you're the person they're looking for, because once they can compromise anything you have, they have access to almost everything. So identity sprawl and access sprawl are there. There's a number of ways to do it using AI tools to start finding out where those outliers are, where is it needed. If it hasn't been used, if access hasn't been used in 3 months, should you cut it off? Should you disable it? And I'm going to go to another buzzword, which is not really covered in the research survey, but it's important only because when I talk about how to really get down to that, zero trust helps you get there. I am not an advocate of zero trust solves everything and you should use it everywhere. But for your most valuable assets, you should be able to say, every time you're going to do anything, I'm going to assume I don't know you, and you have to start from the beginning to identify yourself, authenticate yourself, and confirm access every single time you take an action for these valuable assets. And I think that's a good tool where without identity, that could not happen. The thing I want to close on, really, because I think we're getting pretty close to there, is another term that you heard me talk about, and that's identity as a perimeter. I've been involved with computing for a long time, back when it was just a computer in an air-conditioned room, and that was the walls of the computer and the cable that had the terminal attached to it. That was everything. That was a perimeter. All the data was contained in there. Then it became a data center, and those 4 walls became the perimeter. Then it became the network in a company. And now all the locations in the company on the network became the perimeter. And then it became the internet. And the internet became the perimeter, which essentially becomes infinite. So now we've lost that perimeter, but the perimeter has refined itself within identity, because that is now the first line of defense and your first point of entry to get anything done. So truly, identity is the perimeter. So things like zero trust can't happen with it. Things like being able to protect appropriately and make sure that when someone should lose access, doesn't happen with identity. And without those artificial identities and decoupling them appropriately when you're done, when you sell your phone, you should be wiping it clear so your identity goes away from it, because you don't want someone picking up your identity through that. All of that's important, and all of that's focused on identity.
Yep, I love it. And you're right, we are getting close here. I want to give you a final moment to maybe, I don't know if it's in the report or in your mind or in history, something organizations should probably take a look at with respect to their identity, something that may stand out to you that says, in general, organizations are probably missing the mark here. They're not seeing something, or they're overdoing it, or they're reliant on something too much. What are your thoughts on that?
This is something you'll find in the report, that there are some organizations that had over 40 identity management tools. That's too many. I don't care how large you are. That's way too many. Now, one may not always do it. I think identity vendors need to start doing a better job, and that's mainly a lot of our members. We're working with them to say, what can we do to ensure that you can integrate with each other? You don't have to support each other. You don't have to be the same, but you need to be able to talk to each other. So that from an identity vendor side, I think that needs to happen. From the enterprise side, what needs to occur is the organization needs to recognize that identity needs to become, here's another buzzword, bingo, become a frictionless process, or at least as close as you can get to it, because every time you create a new barrier for someone to get in, they're going to find a way around it. So why cause that, and why put them in that situation? That means come up with a common way of identifying, say, employees across the enterprise. Come up with your process first and what you want it to look like, and I'll bet you can go find a tool that can help you do it once you do that. It's what most organizations are missing. Many are buying tools and finding a way to shove it into what they have and saying this doesn't work. And that's actually worse, because then they say, I'm not doing this. It's too expensive and it doesn't work. So define your process, come up with what identity means to you, whether it's a number, a person, biometrics, come up with that commonality, find tools to support that, and wherever possible, have access to everything based on that. And when you find your outliers, start pushing your vendors to say it's 2023, or when you're listening to this, it may even be 2024. Get with a program. We can no longer have a standalone, I need an ID only for your system.
Give it the program. Give it the program. And when Marco's on with me, my co-founder, we often joke that I always have one more question. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to give you one final word, though. IDSA. How can people get involved, both on the identity management side and then also on the operational side? What do you offer them, and how can they connect with you?
Thank you. And there was a question in there, so you can tell them that you did have a question.
All right, love it.
But thank you for that. IDSA, Identity-Defined Security Alliance. It's a member-based nonprofit organization. Almost everything we do is available for free. We're a nonprofit, like that research report, for instance. However, when you become a member, a business member, you get access to all the data that supports that report, including things we didn't put in it. Plus, you get access, if you're a vendor, to have webinars. As a corporate member, you can request and get some member roundtables that either may or may not have vendors in them, so that we can say, how do we get together to solve problems? I recommend go to idsalliance.org. Take a look into membership. Membership ranges from being an identity vendor to being an identity partner, a consulting group usually, a corporate member, like any standard organization, a large organization that doesn't sell security or identity. And you can also be an individual contributing member. And that one's our lowest one. That costs $250 for a year. You get access to the resource. You get involved in some of the working groups we work on, because we have working groups that develop white papers, blogs, best practices. So all of that's in there. In case you couldn't tell, really enthused about being here. I'm glad I had this opportunity to come this year, and looking forward to build it even more, and encourage everyone to come take a look at what we have. Take a look at what's free and kick the tires, and let us know when you want to get more involved.
Perfect. Jeff, I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to report number 5. I'll join you next year. You're welcome back. We can talk about the next one, see how things have changed. This is number 4, right? I didn't.
Yeah, we are number 4. Number 5's coming up next year. That's correct.
All right. So I'm ready for number 5 when you are. And yep, I think the final takeaway for me is what you said. Give it the program. So let's do this. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing the research with me, and for joining me for this conversation. Hopefully we get people to think differently about identity management and what identities are and how it affects them in business, of course, but ultimately as individuals. So really appreciate it.
Sean, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be here.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching. And I'll link to that report. There's also an infographic, which is very helpful as well. And of course, to connect with Jeff and the rest of the ISDA team, IDSA team, I should say. And be sure to share, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.